It's winter, and you can now get almost anything you need for the coldest months of the year delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a ski slope delivered, but you can get dish soap delivered. Sunshine, that's a no. But a bottle of wine, that's a yes. A snow angel, sorry, no. But angel hair pasta, Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol and select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Ampire.
Hey babies, hey babies, hey babies, hey babies. Hi everyone, back from New Orleans, everybody. Hi everyone, hi everyone. What a bust of a Super Bowl, guys. What a bust. Wow. We're looking better and better every day after they keep killing everybody else.
There was a little bit of a thread going with some of me and my friends of like, I don't feel so bad after this one with the way that they dismantled the Chiefs.
I want to go back to like 2 weeks ago where I said, if we pulled this off, I'm actually rooting for Kansas City to get into the Super Bowl because I think we'd actually have a shot at them.
Right.
I didn't like the Bills as a matchup for Washington. I thought the Chiefs was a more reasonable one. And that seems to be the right take today, too, because, wow, that was a complete, literal beatdown, takedown of them last night. Having seen Philadelphia 3 times, I guess I'm not. I am surprised by the score. I'm surprised by the score. I thought the game would be close. I didn't know which way it would go. I just thought the game would be close. And it was the opposite of that. And, like once Kansas City got to the playoffs after the year where they just barely beat everybody all year long, once they got there, I was like, okay, now we'll get the test. Like we're going to find out if they were playing with their food and they can just turn it on or not. And the Houston game didn't answer that question because they're just a better team than them. And they beat them, but they just kind of got by. When they beat the Bills, I was pretty convinced because that was the one where I'm like, this is the one they're going to lose. And so I was pretty convinced. So I just assumed a close game. So call me surprised. Like I didn't see this coming where they would, especially if you told me Saquon isn't going to be the big factor in the game and they're going to get blown out. You couldn't have convinced me of that.
By Friday, I'm guilty quite a few years of picking a team then flip-flopping on Friday. That's just like, I think a lot of people do it, especially when we talk about it for 2 weeks. I thought the Eagles were going to win this game, and I did not get off of that. I pretty much went with the same concept of their roster is better top to bottom than Kansas City, except at the one position quarterback. And what I did not have on my bingo card outside of what you just said about Saquon and everything was Patrick Mahomes looking absolutely rattled. I mean, he was stepping into pressure, having some bad plays. Like I don't want to take credit away from the Eagles, but I didn't feel like they were doing anything crazy to like confuse him. He just looked under duress, and he never really recovered throughout the entire game.
I gotta say, like whoever came up with their game plan offensively, whether it's Andy Reid or Nagy or whoever, they didn't watch us play them. And so the issue with them, this goes back now for, this really kind of goes back for, what we were talking about for the NFC Championship game, and I talked to our coaching staff a lot about this, and obviously they were on the third go around with them. The issue with Philadelphia this past year was, and this is rare in the NFL these days that you have this, but they win with their front four so much that they drop their safeties back 15 yards. And you just can't hit a big play on them unless like someone falls down. Like you cannot hit a big play on them. So you have to be extremely patient with them. One, your line has to do better than the average against their 4 to give protection. They didn't. 2, you've got to be willing to check it down or run plays into the short intermediate part of the field, hope that those players make some plays so that, it shortens the sticks and it opens up the playbook a little bit for you. And you have to be patient. And considering that Kansas City hadn't been blowing the doors off anybody this year, hadn't been hitting an array of big plays all year, I actually bought into they're going to be built for this. They'll be fine with this. Their quarterback, unlike last night, typically makes great decisions with the ball. Like, I know he does crazy stuff, and that's what's made him who he is, but he doesn't put the ball in harm's way over and over and over. And that was a surprise last night. But Washington's ability to move the ball against them came down to a couple of things. Winning enough at the line of scrimmage to not have Jaden be completely under duress constantly, and looking for people like Eckler and Ertz and other tight ends underneath, because that's the soft spot. You're not going to beat them down the field because they don't have to blitz. Their linebackers just drop into a hole and converge. Every play's a short play if you complete it at all. And when their front wins, they pressure you very quickly, and you're throwing the ball into tight spots that all of a sudden can be turnovers. And the Chiefs, so I was convinced, I'm like, Pacheco and Kelsey and maybe even that other tight end, they're going to have big numbers for them. When they weren't throwing the ball to them, I went, they're cooked. They're completely cooked. It was as if they hadn't watched the Eagles defense the whole year. So that's, football brain that I had last night going, and we just played them, and we'd played them 3 times. And I had heard from the Washington coaches about what they want to do. And I'm watching this materialize. Early, he had a couple of misses to Kelsey that were described as drops, but there were a couple misses to Kelsey. But those were the spots where this is where you can hurt them underneath. And Kelsey, who's a Hall of Fame tight end, he's the perfect weapon against this if you're willing to be patient. Travis Kelce should have had 12 catches for 135 yards last night. The fact that he was targeted as few times as he was tells me they did not plan right for this. Like, I don't know what they were thinking they were going to do, but they were completely off. This is a total mismanagement of a game plan situation to me. And then the execution, once it starts going the wrong way against them, you're cooked because you can't stop them. You can't get down 17-0. I don't care who you are. You can't get down by 17 to them.
Well, and the other side of this too was like you talk about execution. The Chiefs were still trying these weird misdirection plays when it was 17-0. Like, it wasn't completely out of hand yet. Like, you get a score, you're right back in this thing. And it was almost like, I don't know, it screamed a little bit of we still are going to be who we are, even if we lose. And I was like, you got to stop with these misdirection things. You got to just go with what works here. And by the time they finally got out of that, it was the second half and it was already too late. I mean, here's the other thing with the Chiefs too. I said this all year with the Chiefs. Their defense was the key to them winning. And that offense only was scoring around 20 to 25 points a game. The only game they went over 30 points was against the Bills in the AFC Championship game. And honestly, it took a last-second field goal to go over 30 points, right? And they got punched in the mouth and they counterpunched. But throughout the season, they haven't scored a lot. So when they went down early and when the pick six happened, that's when I called it. I was like, oh, this is over. Like, they were not accounting for giving up a possession and the 7 points there. It's done. And it was at that point. I mean, that's where, to me, it was the dagger. And same thing though with Mahomes. He never settled down. Like, it was shades of that Tampa Super Bowl where he was just under duress the whole time. But I thought it was even worse because his decision-making was worse.
It's unusual. They have this. This is what's scary about them moving forward is all these guys are young. So they win with 4 and win big with 4. You don't typically have that in the NFL. They win a lot that way. And it probably, for a team that hasn't faced them, it was probably a touch surprising to them. They probably convinced themselves, oh, if they keep doing this, we'll be fine. They've got Pro Bowl level offensive linemen. No, go watch them play the whole year. This is why they're the number 1 defense in the league. Not only do they have a lot of talent, but they can play a style that very few teams can play. They force everything underneath. You cannot hit big plays on them. I guess Kansas City did late in the game. They hit one big one on them. And they had one of the touchdowns was a Mahomes, classic miracle play where he's running around, buying time and throws the ball from the sideline. There's nothing you can do about that. They hit one big play on them late when it didn't matter and the backups were in. The backups were in. That wasn't C.J. Gardner-Johnson running back there. That was the backups were in because the game was over. That's it. That's the whole year with them. You can't hit big plays on them because of the way that they play. And I just watching it early, I'm when it was just 10-0 and they'd avoided, giving up a couple touchdowns and the Eagles had a turnover in the red zone. And I'm like, okay, settle down. You guys will be fine. When they didn't try to exploit the few areas where the Eagles defense will give you yardage, not a lot, but a little bit, I went, I don't know what they're doing. And once against a team like that, where if they get a lead, I mean, the one thing that did not happen was Saquon didn't bury them. But like typically when you're down big to a team like that and them, we know this, Saquon buries you in the second half. You either run out of time or he pops off some 60-yard touchdown run and that's it, ball game. That didn't actually happen last night, but it easily could have. And this game to me is on the Chiefs' offensive coaches. I don't know what they were looking at. And maybe it's just our experience of having played them 3 times, or I'm watching this going, there's only one way to attack them currently. You have to get their safeties to move up. So that screamed Kelsey should have had a huge high target game last night. They can't cover him. Like they couldn't cover Zach Ertz. They can't cover him. And the ball didn't find it his way, not even remotely close to enough. They completely abandoned the run game. Like, I know that it's hard to run on them, but even Washington, with a run game that was failing down the stretch, did not abandon it against them, because you cannot abandon it against them. They totally abandoned it. This was, I don't know whether this is Andy Reid's game plan or Matt Nagy's or a combination of both, but for the first time in a while, I'm looking at Andy Reid going, what were you thinking last night? What were you watching? Why did you think that would work against them? Or what? I don't even know what you were trying to do, to be honest. So this is the first time in a while, and it's pretty it's ironic it's against the Eagles, because how many times did their fans say when he got close that they hated his game plan, like in the big high leverage game? This is the first one in a while where I looked at Kansas City going, I don't know what you guys were thinking at all last night.
Well, it's also a culmination. Like, did you see the stat last night? They've been down 10-0 in every single Super Bowl. Like, to me, that's a miracle. They've won 3 of them, right? Like,
that's 15. 10, that's what, right? That is.
Yeah, like spotted 10 points in every Super Bowl, and they came out on top on 3 of them. Like, that's a little ridiculous. And I'm with you. Maybe Reid doesn't have a good game plan, and they've just been so good in the past. They've been able to overcome it and make some adjustments.
Well, they have the second greatest quarterback ever.
Sure. Yeah, no, exactly. But I think off of last night, this is pretty much like it was old school football. You cannot hide or scheme behind a dominant defensive line and a dominant offensive line. If you don't have an answer for either one of those on both sides of the ball, that is exactly what happens. Because I also thought this too, like, yes, everyone was talking about how Fangio didn't blitz one time, which that's an amazing stat that they won a Super Bowl with the score that it was.
They never had to. The whole year they never had to.
No, but my other side here, though, is that Eagles offensive line did whatever they wanted all day, too. Like, Hurts didn't have to run for his life. He ran a few times, but Jones wasn't a factor. They couldn't get any pressure on them. That's how Hurts, we talked about it all the time. Like, Hurts isn't the tier A amazing quarterback. He's like tier B, but if you give him time, he's going to kill you. And that's exactly what happened last night.
I think this is worth saying too, because like they have the best team. Yeah. Could they lose along the way? It was always based on, I don't trust Jalen Hurts to win a game if he has to throw the ball, which actually over the last 2 weeks, he was very capable of doing it. Yep. And last night, I thought, like, if anyone had a just desserts moment, it was him, because it was the one time the whole year that Saquon Barkley was like 15 carries for 60 yards. Like, he had a normal average held in check. The one thing the Chiefs did, this isn't on Spags, the one thing he did was he shut down the one thing that was unstoppable the whole year. And we said this before the NFC, I said this before the NFC Championship game, and this was like when I thought he was hurt. When Hurts was hurt, I went, you've got to slow down Barkley. If you do, you put the ball in Hurts' hands. Let's see if he can win it. He did. He hit that 4th and 5 against us where he hit A.J. Brown down the seam. He was great last night, like totally deserving. It's ironic again. Saquon had the year he had, but the MVP of the Super Bowl was Jalen Hurts, and it was actually deserved, because if he's going to play like that, make the majority, he made one terrible throw, but like the majority of the decisions he made, whether it was to run or to throw, were protective of the ball or big plays, or he's going to hit a seam pass on a dagger throw to Devontae Smith, or 4th and 5 to Hurts a week ago, or the other 4th down they converted to A.J. Brown, or the stupid pass interference call that they got early in the game that really shouldn't have been called that was a perfect throw. Well, they're unbeatable. So it's worth saying this too. That's the best roster. The only thing that anybody ever pointed to and said, here's why they could lose, is if they play a Jaden Daniels, a Pat Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, whoever, that the mismatch there at the quarterback is the only thing on either team that you could point to and say, that's where our strength is. And him playing that way makes them unbeatable. And that's what happened the last 2 weeks. If he's going to put the ball in his hands or forced to, and he's going to make enough plays to beat you, you can't beat them unless they're an array of turnovers like fumbles or weird occurrences. You can't beat them. So in Kansas City's defense, like everybody else, that's the best roster, and it's not close. And I might even argue that's the best roster top to bottom I've seen in the NFL in a very long time. So Howie Roseman and them get a lot of credit for putting together. That's ridiculous. Like, name the weakness on their team. Name it, because I don't know of one. Everyone points to Hurts as the weakness. In the end, he's the stupid Super Bowl MVP. Like, what's the if he's going to do that, what's the weakness on their team? It doesn't exist.
No, and I think the most impressive part was, I don't know if you saw the graphic. I forget if it was on social media. Yeah, I think it was on social media, not during the broadcast, of the defense from the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Like, the whole defense got turned over, essentially, and they have rebuilt it from the ground up, but they've kept the same main offensive pieces.
Mainly with draft picks.
Correct,
That's
exactly.
The scariest part of it.
Right. And so that was like the scary comparison, was like, oh, great. Like, they have that whole entire defense intact for a 2 to 3 to 4 year run. You know, with some of these guys too. I'm with you on Hurts too, by the way. Like, he shut up the haters the last 2 games. Like, and guess what? He was healthy too. That was our big gripe going into the Washington game. Like, was he not? If he wasn't healthy, then we had a better chance to win that game. He looked fine against us. He looked fine yesterday, of course, after 2 weeks of rest. He can run that offense. I'm not going to say anyone can, but he was running it very, very well. And the other thing that he did really well last night too, and he did this against us a little bit, he just threw the ball up to A.J. Brown. Like, we've seen this with Terry, with us on our side of things. Sometimes you just got to put the ball in your guy's hands or get it in his vicinity and he'll make plays. And that happened with A.J. Brown over the last 2 games. And, you know, you have to make that decision and trust your guy to do that sometimes.
Yes. I mean, this is Howie's Super Bowl, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really look at it, no offense to the rest of them, but that roster is as good as any roster I've seen top to bottom in a very long time. Like, every other team, and in the NFL with a salary cap, every team has a weakness. Even a couple of years ago, Philadelphia's secondary was an extraordinary weakness that could be exploited, and was. Their defense 2 years ago when they played the Chiefs didn't stop them once in the second half, blew a lead, lost to them in the Super Bowl. They changed a number of these players. For the Chiefs, you could pick plenty of things and say, I don't know if I love their run game. It's okay. You know, like, their offensive line, they've spent a lot of money on these guys, but this year didn't look like the same group. Like, it's kind of weaker. Kelsey doesn't look like the same player that he used to. I wouldn't call tight end a weakness for them. We've known that wide receiver for them has been I wouldn't call it a strength, but it hasn't been it's somewhere in the middle of it's, you know, like, are you scared of their receivers these days? You're not. Like, Philadelphia at every position has an advantage on you. Just about every single one of them. I'll take their duo at receiver over anybody's. Like, you know, with what exception? Chase and Higgins? Like,
yeah,
what
that's about it.
Would you take over those? Their tight ends are good enough. Maybe not great, but Goddard's good enough. It's not like he's bad, and he's a threat. Their running backs, ridiculous. Their quarterbacks turned out to be really good. Their offensive line, I remember citing this 2 weeks ago. Each and every one of them got at least one all-pro vote, and it was totally deserved. We haven't heard about that since the Hogs of the 80s, where every offensive lineman is dominant at their position. Every single one of them is. Their D-line, they win with 4. They're all 23 years old. All of them. They're like, they win with 4. Zach Bond was the deal of the century this year for them. Deal of the century. Like, they found this guy out of nowhere. He's turned out to be a really good player. They're going to have to re-sign him. N'Kobe Dean didn't even play. He got hurt in the playoffs. And their secondary revamped overnight in the draft. This guy Mitchell can really play. This guy DeJean can play. They do not have a weakness on their team. Their weakness ended up being Jake Elliott wasn't as automatic as he had been in the past. And Jalen Hurts at times can be average. And when he's average, that's the only hope you have against them, because at every position, if you do skin tangibles and you do it for real, you're checking off their box. Like, it's impossible not to.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And look, even you have to go all the way back to after the bye week, where that was the only time there seemed to be a little bit of panic in that team. Like, because
when
the crowd was a little...
at the fans and that they won, they beat Cleveland, but everybody knew Cleveland stunk. And Sirianni was yelling at the fans because they weren't winning with any style.
Yeah,
right.
that was the only time I think the seeds of doubt popped up, other than the AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, are we friends or not friends thing. But at the end of the day, I'll take their word for it. That what pissed me off about that one was always, you guys brought this up, not us. So don't be mad at the media on that one. But other than that, I'll give Sirianni credit too. He didn't really waver at all from that point on. I mean, you could pinpoint that first game off of the bye. They did not stop. Foot was on the gas for the whole rest of the way. Yeah.
So in the end, I mean, I think Adam Peters deserves to be in the running for, GM of the year for baselining a roster that got to the NFC Championship game like that, and that many changes. To do that in 1 year, there's a lot of credit that goes around. But Howie's roster is so utterly ridiculous between the draft that they had, acquiring Saquon, et cetera. He's got to be the GM of the year. I mean, it was absurd. It was absurd what they put together, and they deserve a lot of credit. Their team is it's a dominant force. And so the target is on them. And that's the one part of this window for Washington that is really going to be tough to deal with. Like, they're the team to chase now in the NFL, because this wasn't a one-off. Like, there's a feeling, I think, in Detroit, and I don't think it's totally true, that this was their chance, because now both coordinators are gone. I think they knew that was going to happen. Goff, if there wasn't a ding to the confidence level of he's going to get it done, it definitely exists now. They're still going to have the majority of their team back, and their defensive players will get healthy, and they'll be really good again. But there was this feel about them, like this was kind of the year, and they kind of had to do it. That's not it with Philadelphia. Philadelphia is going to bring the vast majority of this team back and add in free agency and a draft again, and they're going to address whatever they feel like they need to address. And, being on Radio Row, talking to a lot of people, in and around them through the week, there are very few things that they expect to change. And why would they? Outside of, can Saquon do that again? Probably not. History says if you have a season like that, there's a downgrade, but it's not like he's going to go to being an average running back. He's just not going to have 2,500 yards or whatever the crazy number is again. The only thing that I heard from the Philadelphia people that I talked to is it's just kind of known that Josh Sweat won't be back. But is that some kind of huge loss? Because they're not going to pay him, and he's going to get something on the open market that's bigger than they want to pay him. And look around at their roster, it's not going to be that big of a deal for them to lose him. They're going to replace him very easily, and they know that they've got to pay other guys, namely like Jalen Carter in a couple of years, or some of these other rookies that they have, or they may need some money to retain, another offensive lineman or whatever it may be. But if you look around, Josh Sweat was the only name that I heard, maybe Slay, we'll see, that's it. The whole team is basically coming back, and look at what they've done. Look how young they are on defense. They're the target. And that's the one part of being where we are right now, where it's very exciting, looking up, aiming up, arrows pointing up. But the best team in the NFL is in your division. It's tough.
No, it's not only tough, but I think also off of last night's game, it made me a little bit more excited, about this team, about how they performed this season. I sent off a tweet last night of going, somehow the Commanders, with 3 really bad mistakes, had a better performance than the Chiefs did in the Super Bowl against that team.
They had a better game plan.
Yeah, and the number one thing that I'm pointing to, and I already referenced like Mahomes before, was Jaden still didn't look rattled in that game. They were down by a lot. He still looked like the same quarterback. Mahomes did not. Like, that's rare for Mahomes to look that tilted during a game. So that was the other factor of this too, that I, as a Commanders fan, I was like, okay, like, let's giddy up again for this for next year and the year after and the year after. The other thing, by the way, that like, because we didn't talk a lot once you started getting on the guest on Radio Row, was the scariest part about last week was, here's the Chiefs and the Eagles getting ready for the Super Bowl, and a top 5 defensive player, Myles Garrett, becomes, I don't know if he's available, but asks for a trade, right? And one of the teams everyone starts spitting out is Philly. Like, they're sitting in the Super Bowl and they're poised to go on a run to get a top 5 player in the league. Like the perspective on that is crazy when you think about it too, that they're so set everywhere that they can afford to go get a guy like that. That's what's scary here too, because Roseman likes making those moves too.
Yes. Like, there's part of me that wants us to get Myles Garrett to avoid him going there.
Yes. Or Detroit. Like it went right away that he could go to one of those NFC contenders.
Yeah, it's rough. They're really, really good. They're really built to be good for a period of time. And part of it is they just nailed this draft, and the last couple really. And a couple of them were, I remember when they drafted Jalen Carter at 9 or whatever it was. And that guy should have been the number 1 pick in the draft. But because of some off the field stuff, didn't go number 1. And when they took him, I went, oh, for crying out loud. Like, that's the last place I want somebody who's that talented to end up. Like, he shouldn't be there. He should be on Jacksonville or whatever right now, but they didn't want to take him because of how high he was. So, or how the off the field stuff, they didn't want to take him at that point in the draft. And so they've just really nailed it. And, I want to give them credit. And I feel like I remember a couple of weeks ago when I was talking to my friends in Philly, and I'm like, this is the first of, I think, a few of these over the next couple of years, because they recognize, and I think the whole NFL world over the last week threw the flowers at Washington because of Jaden, and they look at him. But to your point, and to what I was talking about earlier, the game plan that Washington had against Philadelphia 2 weeks ago was dwarfed the game plan that Kansas City walked in with. And it's almost as if they looked at that final score and said, well, we can't do those things or something. But the final score was not indicative of how close the game actually was. Like, the turnovers that Washington had, the mistakes that they made, or what flipped things on a dime. If you do that against a team of that caliber, you are not going to win, and it might look really ugly. That's what happened to Kansas City last night. They made the types of mistakes. Those 2 picks, the one that was a pick 6 and the one that Bond had, those were just terrible throws. Like, really. Our quarterback didn't at least do that. Our quarterback didn't have a bad game. We had mistimed fumbles. Like, that's what happened to us. And it spiraled the wrong way on them. But I keep thinking back now going, man, they were down by 11 in the second half. Jaden's moving the ball, and that Eckler fumble killed them. They had a game plan to move the ball against them. Kansas City just didn't even watch it because they didn't even try to replicate any of it. And having the familiarity with it, I was like texting all my friends. I'm like, Kelsey's going to have a huge game. Like, there's no way around it. He just is. Like, I don't know whether they'll win or not, but he's going to have 10 catches for 130 yards because they can't cover him, and that's who gets yards against Philadelphia. The fact that they barely threw the ball to him, to me, was like, I don't even know what you guys are doing. I don't know what you think you're doing. You didn't pay attention to what we did that actually worked. We're the only team that's had any success against them at all. Like, I don't know what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I didn't understand the game plan at all. And like I said, they were too late to make adjustments too. Like, they still had to run their offense with the weird misdirections and stuff. It was, I don't know. It was just a really weird, like, it seemed like an ego thing with them too. It was like they were not going to let themselves lose, like actually not doing what they wanted to do. It was weird. Honestly, it was weird. It got out of hand.
I'll give Spags credit here. They're the only team that handled Barkley. They're the only ones. Like, the only ones that did it. And I said this 2 weeks ago when we played him. I go, if we could slow down Barkley, put the ball in Hurts' hands, and he beats us, I'll shake your hand and say good luck in the Super Bowl. And like, same thing. He made huge throws against them that worked. What are you going to do? They're just, at some point, they're just too good. You have to just say that. They're just, if you could do everything, then you're just too good. So I thought Spags was fine last night. It's the offensive side of the ball where I just don't even understand what they were doing. And that's on Andy or Nagy or whoever. or Mahomes, whoever it is, to go, you guys were paying no attention to them. You clearly didn't respect them. Maybe it's because you didn't play them all year, but we had played them 3 times, we knew what the tough task was to do against them. And it was almost as if they didn't watch us play them and didn't try to replicate any of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that they just totally abandoned their run game altogether was, what are you guys doing? Like what? So whatever, that's them. All right, let me take a quick break. Brady wants to show ESPN 630 Sports Capital. Missing out on a show that everyone is talking about is not an option for me. I'm constantly signing up for this streaming service or that one. And then a few months later, I realize I've been paying for this service long after I actually finished that show. Getting Rocket Money was a game changer for me. They'll find your unwanted subscriptions. They'll even help you cancel them, so you never have to worry about them slipping through the cracks. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. See all of your subscriptions in one place and know exactly where your money is going. For ones you don't want anymore, Rocket Money can help you cancel them. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts. Easily create a personalized budget with custom categories to help you keep your spending on track. See your monthly spending trends in each category to know exactly where your money is going. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/game on today. That's rocketmoney.com/game on. rocketmoney.com/game on.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
All right, welcome back. I want to do Tom Brady, the broadcaster. Okay. So he's been hit over the head a million times this year because he did not walk into the booth and become Howard Cosell, which everybody wanted him to be the greatest broadcaster of all time, which was, unrealistic, unfair. And in modern media where there's 8 million different people doing the same thing over and over, separating yourself from another one is very hard to do. So I didn't hear a lot of him this year. There were only a few occasions because oftentimes I was either with the team or traveling or they're up against. So I didn't really hear a lot of it.
Yeah.
The bye week, I heard him call a game. There was some other Sunday. I think we had a Thursday game. I heard him call a game. And then obviously I watched him last night and I was paying close attention because this is as high leverage as it gets. And I thought he was fine. Like I didn't think he was bad. I didn't think he deserved the criticism he deserved. Maybe he's just getting better. But here's what I would tell you about what I think about him. And this is what I think it is. I actually don't think he watched a lot of broadcasts in the past. I think he watched a lot of tape.
Yeah.
He obviously knows the game. If you ask him about the game, he can answer literally any question. And can he say it in a way that is smooth and flows within a broadcast? That's where the problem is. And that to me only reads, I think if you asked him, who are your favorite color analysts? He would not have a good answer to that question because he probably didn't watch very much of it. That's where I think the problem is. If I were them, I would start with him and say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch this person, this person, this person, this person. I want you to tell us what you like about him and what you don't. And then we can go from there Because what we'll all agree on is these people that we've selected for you to watch are really good at this. We're not asking you to be them. We need you to figure out what you like about them that works for you, because that's my take on him. I don't think he's watched a lot of games on television with broadcasters calling it. I think he's watched a lot of games with the all 22 on film with no voice. He doesn't know what a broadcaster sounds like. That's what I think is going on here. That's what I think.
I think that's probably a pretty good take. I also just think he is not comfortable in a booth yet. Like that's what I've gotten. I think he even still has some really awkward pauses where like he doesn't even finish thoughts sometimes.
Yes,
those to me are the jarring
timing
ones.
Is way off.
Yeah, and so yes. I think for him, I think he's doing this thing too, where like you learn how to do this when you work in sports, like whether you're calling games like you or like I'm producing a broadcast, where you have to do the thing where you watch the game and work. And it depends what your work is, right? I don't think he's realized how to like kind of process it and talk at the same time.
Correct.
There are a lot of times where the play literally happens and he's letting Tom, like he's waiting for Tom to jump in and he almost jumps in a little bit too late and the timing gets weird. So I think there's that too, where Tom like kind of waits to see a whole entire play happen instead of just kind of jumping in and have to talk it out during. I think that's what I found. It's probably like the most difficult thing for him at this point. I'm with you. I thought he was fine. Actually, what he was the best at was that game. You know how this goes. Sometimes broadcasters don't know how to handle those blowouts because there's nothing to talk about.
This is where he was terrific last night.
Awesome. Yeah, he was fantastic last night.
The game was a blowout. And, I was watching the game with some people and they were all just talking because the game got out of hand. And, I started to get pissed because I'm like, as an NFL broadcaster who hopes one day to call a Super Bowl, I want to hear what they're saying. Like I was just dying to hear what they're saying because I'm trying to take it in, and just memory banks of how they handled a situation like this, a blowout in the Super Bowl. This is where he loosened up and was great and actually talked about the losses he suffered in the Super Bowl. And I had to like shush people. I'm like, I want to hear this. I want to hear what he says and how he handles it. When it was a low pressure situation where they just leaned on his expertise and his experience, he actually was terrific last night. He was maybe at his best when the score was out of hand and Kevin could just turn to him and say, all right, you've actually maybe not like this been here, but you have been here. What do you think Patrick Mahomes is feeling right now? And when he started talking about it, he told a story where he was like, I woke up the next day and thought that was just a nightmare and it never really happened. It was like a really incredible moment for him to kind of share. This is where he was at his best. I agree. The in-game moving as fast as it is, trying to react in real time, he's not quite good at it yet. I still think he could get good at it. But my total read on it was, I actually think this guy hasn't seen a lot of games where he hears the broadcasters. And that's the problem. Because if he had heard more of it, like I defy him. If I said to you, who are your favorite color commentators? He'd probably have a different answer now than he did a year ago. I would bet to say he didn't watch enough of it to even know. That's where I think the problem was. And that's where I think I would start with him. And with him, he gets salty real fast. I think people actually like that part of him. They want to see the Tom Brady that got real salty when things happened. And then secondarily, like he just needs to let it go a little bit and react. We're paying you all this money. You are who you are because you see things we don't. Say them. Say them.
Well, and so not only in the second half, when they kind of let him go, he was really good right away on some of those calls early, the questionable ref calls where he was like, oh, he did not waffle. He was like, nope, don't like that one either. Like that was where
he agreed with the pick on the touchdown. He agreed with it. He said, that's a pick. It goes back.
Yeah. And like, he called that out real fast. So like, it's there. He's just got to work on his fastball a little bit in terms of timing. And like, that honestly too though is those were the two best parts with him, is that he was good on the refs and that the second half when they needed story time Tom, he delivered better than I think anyone could have ever asked for, because you're like, this guy's played in 1 million Super Bowls. That paid for itself within that second half essentially.
He was actually the perfect person to have in the booth for a game like that. Mm-hmm. Where you could now say to him, you've been on both sides of this. What do you think? Right. And the stories he ended up telling and the way he told them, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. So no offense to Greg Olson, this was the moment where Brady actually shined. Unfortunately, it was a game that was completely out of hand, and the rest of America was now tuning out because only people like us who care were actually paying attention. Everybody else I was in the room with was like, well, this is dumb, because it was like Super Bowl bust. They didn't want anything to do with it. Anyway, my point, I think, largely is this. I think he received too much criticism, albeit to be fair, I didn't see a ton of games he called because I was on the road or at the stadium doing our own thing. But that's when I did see him. That's what I heard. I heard someone who hasn't heard high-level professional broadcasters do it very much. That's what I heard. So that's where I'd start with him. I would not, if I'm Fox, review the tape of him. I'd go, what do you think you did wrong here? Or I wouldn't do that. I would play others and say, what do you like about them?
Right.
And see if you could incorporate it differently and just show him the craft of it a little bit. This is when they jumped in. This is why they jumped in. This is how quickly they got out of it. You know all these things. Like, it's not like it's not like we have to teach you the game. You're teaching us the game. We just need to show you how to do this smoothly, quickly, and when it's your turn to grab the reins and take over. And I think that's where so I think it's still very promising with him. Like, I really do. And in those moments last night for him, when it was a blowout, is when he was at his best, actually. He has expertise that no one has, especially with that greatest player of all time who did lose Super Bowls. Here he is describing Mahomes' mindset. He's the only person on earth that could actually do that.
And he also did the perfect thing, too, of you and I know from watching enough sports, every great always talks about how much they hated losing instead of winning. That was a very good point to bring up. And losses sting 100 times worse than winning feels, essentially. I thought that was because you and I have talked about this too. Sometimes you have to keep it simple because this is a huge game. There's a bunch of people that don't watch football that are watching this game. And the fact that he brought that up right away, because here's the greatest quarterback of all time that's won 7 Super Bowls, literally the first thing he said.
The other thing with him, I actually appreciated that he brought up, was he pointed out, because people never remember this, the year that he beat Mahomes, the Chiefs had lost their 2 starting tackles that week, and pointed out he was like, Mahomes was very much under duress the entire game. Gave him an excuse. That is pretty self-aware, because here's he won that Super Bowl, and he's saying, you know what, Mahomes did have, and I thought it was actually fair for him to literally say it on the Super Bowl broadcast. When we beat him, he had the same problem, protection, and they're going to need to go back to the drawing board. It was a different situation. They had really poorly timed injuries in that Super Bowl. This one, their guys just got whooped by the Eagles. That's all that ended up happening. Yeah. All right, one other quick thing from the Super Bowl last night. All right, I thought Kendrick Lamar was terrific. I have seen a lot of people say this, and this was my experience actually with it last night, being with a lot of people in a room watching it, there was a subset of people who had no idea who he was. And I was actually semi-surprised by that, but I've seen on the internet a lot of people, their takeaway was that a good portion of the audience had never heard of him or just didn't know anything about him, which to me, as a big music person, was unbelievable, to me, especially just considering if you're on social media at all last summer, to not know who he was and why that song was number 1 is just casually dismissive of pop culture. But I'll put that aside for a moment. He's been around a long time. He's won didn't he win he won the Nobel Prize, didn't he? For
correct.
He's had major hit albums. So for me, it's hard to believe that people don't know who he is. But I had the same experience where I was in a room of people who were not sure who he was.
Yeah, I had the same, not the same experience, but then when it was over, people were like, that was meh to me. And I was like, that was awesome to me. I'm also a fan, though.
I thought that was incredible.
And here's where I think the disconnect is I put it akin to watching an Avengers movie, but you haven't seen the 5 movies before. You just didn't know what this was supposed to be unless you had read up on the backstory on what was coming, essentially. That's how I felt. I'm with you. If you weren't on social media last summer, or if you were on social media, I don't know how you didn't know like how this guy was taking over rap. He became the best rapper for a summer essentially by making fun of and making accusations to the biggest music star in the industry. Like, I don't know. For some people, there was a disconnect there, and that's fine. The other thing that I don't really understand, though, is Kendrick performed in LA 3 years ago. Like, he was a part of that Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, Snoop Dogg performance. Like, you have seen him before. Like, you have seen him. He performed in his hometown. So, I don't know. I loved it. I love the production of it. Is there a different feel when there's a rapper on as opposed to a rock band or someone like Usher who's going to dance like crazy? Yeah, it's a different feel. Is it the platform that maybe it's a little bit different than Kendrick? I'll hear you out on that. I loved it, though. I couldn't wait to see it. And I couldn't believe he actually did sing, They Not Like Us at the end, especially teasing it halfway through.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it so much, but I also get why people are just having this disconnect with Kendrick.
Well, right. Like, you have to know his story a little bit, and put aside the Drake stuff for a minute. Like, you have to know his story a little bit about what he's about as an artist to understand the genius of the Samuel L. Jackson part of the whole thing. Like, if you don't know that part, then I would see where you're like, what is this? It feels like some kind of weird stunt, but it was an amazing part of the whole thing. And then I saw someone else write this, and I thought this was true. He said this was one of the first ones where they did a made-for-TV show that was not made for the stadium audience.
Yep.
The majority of the audience is at home, and it was wise for him to do one that was really made for television, as opposed for the in-stadium audience that probably didn't know that Serena Williams was part of the whole thing, or probably couldn't even tell that was Samuel L. Jackson, or like took a second for all of it. It was a perfectly placed TV version of a halftime show. I thought he was great. His music, I love him, and I love his music. I also was surprised that he played Not Like Us, because I actually thought the NFL would put their foot down and say, considering the lawsuit that's involved with that they don't want to be embroiled in any of that at all. But they allowed it. They let it go, obviously without some of the language, and he didn't actually use the word pedophile. That was noticeable. He didn't actually use that word. But like, I thought he was great. I just was kind of surprised, but it was confirmed. Like, when I saw on social media of how many people did still not know who he is, which is interesting to me, I guess, on some level of there's a disconnect that even with all this information flooded through all the different outlets by which you can get to it, that we're all still in such silos from one another. Like, the idea that you wouldn't know who that is preposterous to me, but it was the case.
Yeah, and like, what I don't really understand too is he sings "They Not Like Us," which was the #1 song over the summer, correct? Yes. He does "Humble," which you had to have heard 5, 6, 7 years ago when that came out. That was all over the charts. Then he sang, I forget what the name of the song is, but it's with SZA from the Black Panther movie. Yes. Like, how many people in America saw Black Panther? Like, I even forgot about that. I was like, oh, of course he's gonna play that. Like, he was on that soundtrack. Like, and then you've also heard these other songs from the latest album that have made their way on social media. Like, I don't know. I thought it was a little head in the sand from some people that were like, oh, I've never heard of it. Like, no, you have. Maybe you just didn't know it was him. I also, though, like, this is what I'm saying when I say it's like watching a Marvel movie. You don't know the references. Like the whole thing, he was wearing a lowercase a chain for A minor. Like, he was wearing that. Like, he was also... the whole entire field was an X, a triangle, a square, and a circle, which is a Sony PlayStation controller. Drake's label is Sony, and then it said "Game Over" at the end. Like, there was a lot of things that even if you were a fan, you weren't going to get. And so that's where I thought maybe this one is just not the platform for him. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I totally see why a bunch of other people didn't get it, essentially.
Yeah, I actually thought it was amazing. Really, really, really amazing. All right, last quick thing here. I want to mention the Caps because they're off this week. I saw this when I looked up last night because they had another comeback yesterday and got a point out of getting to overtime and eventually a shootout with Utah. And this has happened regularly where they've had these comebacks. Even I remember a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the one in Ottawa where they were down. It was one of those back-to-back night things. And it was just like, and they came back anyway. They have one loss in regulation since December 29th. Like, even the nights that they're off, they fight through and at least get a point out of the whole thing. Like, they're they're magic. They really are. They're magic this year.
That one's at home. It's at home because they lost to Vancouver on the road in regulation. So it's at home.
One loss since December 29th. That's it. One loss.
Yeah, exactly.
Total.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is who they are, though. Like, and it's weird. They've turned into the old 2010 Caps. They'll go down to all of these teams and then come back in the third period. It's such a throwback to those old Ovechkin teams. But here's the difference between this Caps team and those teams. The Capitals have the best third period defense in the entire league right now. Like, that is the difference between these Caps and the old Caps. They will lock it down in the third. So when they do score, they tend not to let anything up. And so, yeah, I mean, they're just streaking towards us. Last night or yesterday afternoon should have been worse, honestly. Utah scored on their first 2 shots of the game in 90 seconds, and then they pull that one out of the fire late in the third. So, I mean, the way I just look at it right now is this Caps team, they were kind of overdue for one, to lose at home yesterday and have kind of a dud. But even in the duds, there's some bright spots.
You get a point.
Exactly. They get a point. Now they're off for 2 weeks. They're one of, how about this, by the way? Best team in the league. They're them in Winnipeg. They're the best team in the Eastern Conference. They're one of 2 teams that does not have a single player on one of these 4 nations tournament teams for the next 2 weeks. So how about that? Like, they not only get to rest, they get to kind of sit with, oh, you didn't think we're going to be that good? You don't think we have a single player that's worth putting in this tournament? That's funny. Let's see how we come out for the last, 25, 30 games or so.
All right. See y'all tomorrow. Bray wants to show ESPN 630 Sports Capital.